After making a bad decision, you are usually quite hard on yourself. It sits heavy in your chest. It asks you why you keep doing this to yourself. You look at the trail of your repeated mistakes. You hand yourself a very simple, very painful diagnosis. You tell yourself you are just weak. You tell yourself you lack discipline. You tell yourself you just aren't smart enough to learn the lessons of life. You conclude that you are fundamentally broken, but you are entirely wrong about that. This is a tragic misunderstanding of how the human mind actually operates under pressure. Bad decisions are almost never just the result of bad thinking. They are usually a messy collision between cognitive biases, unmanaged emotions, high stress, and old habits. You do not make bad choices because you are foolish. You make them because your brain relies on old systems that occasionally misfire. That too, in very predictable ways. Let us start with how your mind handles the unknown. The human brain absolutely despises uncertainty. When you're missing information, your brain doesn't wait for a complete set of rational facts. It panics and immediately builds a bridge out of mental shortcuts. Two famous psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, explain this beautifully. They published a groundbreaking paper on judgment under uncertainty. They discovered that people frequently make predictable mistakes because they rely on mental shortcuts. They called these shortcuts heuristics. These shortcuts help us make fast judgments in an unpredictable world. They are often useful, but they also create massive blind spots. One of these shortcuts is called representativeness. This simply means we judge a situation by how it looks or feels, rather than looking at the actual evidence. If a situation matches a familiar stereotype in your head, you will probably believe it is true. You will believe it even when the actual statistical odds say otherwise. People constantly ignore statistics. Why do we do this? Because a compelling, emotional story feels infinitely more convincing to the human mind than raw numbers ever could. Tversky and Kahneman also highlighted something called the illusion of validity. This is a powerful psychological trap. You can feel highly confident about a terrible choice just because the information forms a neat pattern in your head. The pattern might be entirely weak, it might be completely misleading, but it feels right. We easily forget that confidence is not the same thing as accuracy. A story that feels coherent can make you sure of a phenomenally bad judgment. Sometimes your mind does not ask what is statistically true. It just asks what a situation reminds you of. That simple shortcut can make a terrible decision feel undeniably obvious. You're not trying to ruin your life. Your brain is just aggressively trying to simplify a deeply uncertain world. Now let's look at time. Time completely warps our internal compass. Have you ever wondered at why it's so easy to plan a perfectly disciplined life on a Sunday morning, only to abandon every single one of those plans by Sunday night? It looks like a massive collapse of character, but it is actually a predictable shift in psychological gravity. Impulsiveness is not just random weakness, it is a highly predictable pattern. A small, short-term reward becomes overwhelmingly powerful as the moment of temptation gets closer to you. You can genuinely want the better, long-term choice, but you will still betray that choice when the temptation gets close enough. The future feels incredibly important from a distance, but the present feels intensely urgent. As time passes and the immediate reward gets closer, your preferences can actually reverse entirely. You don't always choose the bad option because you don't know any better. Sometimes you choose it because the reward got close enough to temporarily hijack your entire value system. The emotional value of your options literally changes based on how close they are. This explains why the rewards you delay lose their power over time in a curved, non-linear way. This is exactly why you plan wisely in the morning and act impulsively at night. True self-control is not about trying to be heroic in the blinding moment of temptation. It is about preparing your life before it gets strong enough to bend your reality. We also really love to believe we are deeply rational creatures. We think we are logical beings who just occasionally have feelings. The truth is much closer to the exact opposite. We are profoundly emotional creatures who occasionally manage to string together rational thoughts. Researchers have looked deeply at the connection between emotion and decision-making. They have found that emotions influence our choices in powerful, widespread, and entirely predictable ways. People frequently go through life thinking they are making purely logical choices. They are completely unaware their underlying emotional state is actively shaping what feels important to them in that exact moment. Fear can make the safety of doing nothing feel exponentially more valuable than taking a great opportunity. Anger can make blame, punishment, or sudden destructive action feel entirely justified. Sadness, anxiety, shame, and loneliness actively change what your brain pays attention to. They narrow your focus. They make you seek immediate emotional relief instead of long-term stability. Researchers also found that this emotional influence doesn't have to come from the decision itself. They call these carry-over emotions. For example, the lingering stress from a terrible morning commute can heavily influence your judgment during an afternoon meeting. The emotion just carries over and quietly corrupts the new choice. Many bad decisions are not made by the logical mind at all. They are made by an emotional state, frantically trying to protect itself, soothe itself, or escape acute discomfort. Intense emotions can make people feel entirely out of control. You cannot always just think your way out of these states. You often have to use psychological techniques to actively calm down, and then reduce that harmful emotional influence before you choose. But what happens when you know all of this? What if you are perfectly, painfully aware that a choice is bad, and you still sit there and watch yourself make it? This is perhaps the most haunting version of the bad decision. You feel like a helpless passenger in your own body. Knowing better is not the same as choosing better. Good decision-making requires more than just conscious knowledge. It heavily involves deep emotional learning and physical, body-based warning signals. Researchers call these signals somatic markers. They have conducted gambling experiments where normal participants started avoiding bad, risky choices before they could consciously explain why those choices were dangerous. Their bodies produced anticipatory warning signals. Their skin conductance spiked. They got sweaty palms. It was a physical intuition that arrived long before their intellect caught up. The same researchers also studied patients with specific damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is an area of the brain crucial for linking emotion and reason. These patients continued to choose poorly. The tragic part is that some of them could explain that their choices were undeniably bad. They understood the logic perfectly, but they completely lacked those bodily warning signals. A person can understand the right answer and still fail to act on it. Knowing the lesson is not the same as having your nervous system trained to choose differently. Some repeated bad choices happen simply because your emotional warning system is weak, ignored, or disconnected from your conscious mind. The brain desperately needs the ability to connect choices with felt, bodily consequences. Abstract facts are rarely enough to stop a bad urge. Add stress to this delicate internal system, and the architecture of good decision-making completely collapses. Stress does not just make you feel emotionally terrible, it fundamentally changes how your brain evaluates every single option in front of you. It heavily impairs how you value rewards. When you are under immense pressure, your brain shifts away from flexible, goal-directed thinking. It pushes you straight toward rigid, habit-based behavior. Under acute stress, your brain stops asking what is best for you in the long term. It frantically starts asking what will get you through the next 5 minutes of agony. Stress makes the familiar path feel profoundly safer. It does this even when that familiar path is the very mistake you have been trying to avoid. Ingrained habits require less mental effort than flexible thinking, and so a stressed mind almost always defaults to the path of least resistance. It tries to conserve precious mental energy. Additionally, stress can dramatically alter your risk-taking behaviors. Depending on the situation, stressed people might become paralyzingly cautious, or they might become destructively reckless. A stressed person makes bad decisions not because they are foolish, but because their biological stress systems are ruthlessly prioritizing immediate relief, speed, and deep familiarity. Over time, these stress-induced impulsive choices crystallize into something far more stubborn. They become invisible habits. At a certain point, the problem is no longer that you keep consciously choosing to make a mistake. The problem is that the mistake has become completely automated. Once a habit successfully forms, your environment alone can trigger the behavior. You do not even have to actively think about your goals anymore. Research shows that nearly 45% of our everyday behaviors are repeated in the exact same physical locations almost every single day. The brain learns a brutally simple equation. It says that when you are in this specific place with these specific people, Feeling this exact emotion, you just execute this exact behavior. Habits are not just about internal desire. They are heavily dependent on external cues. You can possess a genuine intention to completely change your life, but you might still repeat an old habit if the link between your environment and behavior is stronger than your conscious intention. Breaking these automated patterns requires more than just brute motivation. You have to interrupt the routine. You might even need life changes, such as moving to a new environment. Persuasion and motivation could prove entirely useless if your environment keeps triggering the old behavior. This brings us to the great cultural myth of willpower. We love the idea that if you just tried a little harder, you would finally stop making bad choices. But willpower alone is an incredibly weak and unreliable strategy for changing your life. Self-control failures are universally common. It's because people force themselves to choose between a want option and a should option. The want option is always more tempting in the now. The should option is always better for the distant future. We usually know exactly what we should do, but the immediate reward feels overwhelmingly louder in our minds. Bad decisions are rarely fixed by telling someone to muster up more willpower. Such failures persist even when people recognize them and resolve to act differently the next day. Researchers highlight that intention and action are fundamentally different psychological events. Deciding in your head to delay gratification doesn't guarantee you will actually follow through. Systems beat willpower every single time. Systems reduce the number of psychological battles you have to fight in a day. Self-control is not about being fundamentally stronger than your own impulses. It is about actively designing your environment so bad decisions have fewer chances to reach you. You need concrete tools for this. You can pair something you love with something you need to do. You can use commitment devices. You can practice psychological distancing. You have to remove triggers from your sight instead of constantly fighting your desperate desires. Finally, we must look at why we stay. Why do we linger in the bad relationship long after it turns cold? Why do we stay in the dead-end job? Why do we keep investing in destructive cycles long after we realize they're hurting us? We stay because leaving forces us to confront the terrifying ghost of wasted time. This is the psychology of sunk cost. People are more likely to continue down a terrible path once they have invested money, time, effort, or intense emotion into it. The driving psychological force here is a desperate, agonizing desire not to feel wasteful. The human mind twists old investments into rationales to keep suffering today. The more you have poured into something, the harder it becomes to evaluate it honestly. You stay in bad decisions because leaving makes the past feel like a massive failure. The sunk cost fallacy is simply when the past starts making decisions for your future. Sunk costs can be financial, but they are often about identity. They are about love, loyalty, pain, or profound personal sacrifice. People will keep investing in mistakes to avoid admitting their earlier investments were wrong. Researchers Arkes and Bloomer found that even formal coursework in economics did not eliminate this deeply ingrained bias. In one famous scenario, they asked people about a hypothetical radar plane project. When participants were told millions had already been invested, most chose to keep funding the doomed project. When the exact same final investment was presented without any prior sunk cost, most rejected it. The question you must learn to ask yourself is not how much you have already lost. It's whether you would choose the same thing again if you were starting completely fresh. The psychology of people who keep making bad decisions reveals a highly complex system, one that is functioning exactly as it evolved to. It is just misfiring wildly in the modern world. You rely on mental shortcuts because reality is too complex to process moment to moment. Your ancient brain was wired to prioritize surviving today over prospering tomorrow. So if you keep making bad decisions, you have not failed to learn the lesson. You are repeating them because the psychological pattern is simply stronger. It is louder, and it is much older than the lesson. But patterns, once they are finally illuminated, can be unraveled. Cues can be identified and completely changed. Environments can be intentionally redesigned to support you. The moment you stop judging yourself for a lack of willpower or intelligence, you can start over again. You can begin the quiet, steady work of understanding your own mind. You can stop fighting your psychology and start working alongside it.